Hey everyone, welcome back to the iGaming experience. I'm your host Sam Bhatti here in the beautiful Zebra Studios in Podgorica, Montenegro, as always. And today I want to talk about iGaming conferences. Again, I have mentioned it before, but this time I want to go a bit deeper than just tips and tactics. I want to talk about what conferences really do for people, especially if you're new to the industry, which is who this podcast is ultimately for, and why simply showing up, even when it feels uncomfortable, is one of the most important things you can do, especially when you're just getting started. Because if you've never been to an iGaming summit before, or you've only been to one or two, it can feel intimidating in a very specific way. You walk into this huge venue. There's music. There's lights. There's massive booths. There's people serving drinks. There's people handing out merch. There's people hugging like they're old friends from college. Everyone seems busy. Everyone seems like they belong. And you're standing there thinking, I don't know anyone. I don't know where I fit. Am I even supposed to be here? What am I actually supposed to do? If you've ever felt that quiet sense of being on the outside looking in, I want you to know something straight away. Almost everyone felt that way at some point. Even the people who now look completely at home. And what do those people that now look comfortable have in common? Well, one thing I can tell you for sure is that they all showed up. They all went there and got their face seen. They shook hands. One of the biggest misunderstandings about success, not just in iGaming, but in any industry, is that it comes from being the smartest person in the room or having the perfect pitch or knowing exactly what to say. In reality, a massive part of success in this industry comes from something much, much simpler, which is simply being present consistently over time. That's it. People start recognizing your face. They remember seeing you at the last event. They associate you with being around, being engaged, being part of the ecosystem, being part of the industry. That familiarity is extremely powerful. It's not about forcing conversations or pushing yourself into rooms you don't belong in. It's about letting people get used to you being there, letting relationships form naturally, letting trust build slowly, the only way that it can. And that can only really happen in person. Online connections are useful, but essentially they're flat. They don't have texture. They don't have shared moments. When you meet someone in real life, even briefly, everything changes. Messages feel warmer. Conversations flow more easily. Businesses become more human. And honestly, much more enjoyable. In fact, my current project that I'm working on it stemmed from a meeting that I had at ICE 3 years ago for 5 minutes. Literally someone I had met online, interacted with online a few times. We were both at ICE. We arranged to meet. We stood in the hallway, shook hands for 5 minutes, and that person is the chairman of the board of the project that I work on. So I don't know if I necessarily would have got this opportunity had that meeting not taken place. Maybe, but maybe not. Let's talk honestly and specifically about first summits. Okay. If you've been to several summits, this may or may not be useful for you, but I'll be brief. so dial in. Your first iGaming conference is rarely quote unquote successful in the way that most people, I'm guessing, imagine. You don't leave with a calendar full of meetings. You don't leave with a handful of deals. You don't suddenly feel totally plugged into the industry. And that's okay. That's normal. A successful first summit usually looks much quieter than most people, I think, would expect. It looks kind of like this. You walk the floor, you observe, you start recognizing company names you've seen online and never in person. You have a couple of short conversations that probably will feel slightly awkward, but hopefully friendly. Maybe you exchange LinkedIn details and business cards with a handful of people. And you leave hopefully thinking, okay, I get it a bit more now. Just a bit. That right there is a win. That's a big win. Because the real value of your first summit isn't what you achieve. It's what you unlock. You've now crossed an invisible line. The next time you go, the venue feels familiar. The flow makes more sense. You recognize a logo earlier. You recognize a face earlier, maybe a name. You feel slightly less like an outsider. That's how momentum starts. So let me talk a little bit now about the events themselves, right? I'll start with the big events and what they're really good for. Because most people's first exposure to iGaming conferences, I think, comes through the big shows. So what are they? Well, ICE, which I believe stands for International, I should know this, International Casino Exhibition. That's what it stands for. ICE is the obvious one. It's enormous. It's very intense. It's where you really feel the scale of the industry. You see the biggest companies putting up huge stands, right? Evolution, Pragmatic Play, Soft Swiss, Digitane, Every Matrix, Sport Radar. These guys are putting out massive, unbelievable booths. And through that, you start to understand where the weight of the industry sits. ICE is great for that perspective. It shows you the breadth of iGaming. It helps you understand who's big, who's growing, and where the energy is right now. So that's ICE. And then I would say the next biggest set, really the only other one I think that's comparable, would be the SBC Summit events. So the biggest one, I believe, is in Lisbon. They have them in North America. They have them in South America. I believe they've got one in Africa. They've got one going in the Middle East. So they're all over the place. Their events are, like ICE, very large and very well structured. There's good content. There's good organization, a strong mix of operators and suppliers and affiliates and media and payments, everything. Everyone's going to be there. Okay, so that's ICE, SBC. Just lock those two in if you're new. Okay. These big events are brilliant for orientation. Really great at giving you a scope of the size of the industry, who the big players are, and what direction is the industry going? What is everyone talking about? But they're not always where people feel most comfortable building real relationships, especially early on. So where connections really start to form for a lot of people are at smaller or more curated events. I'm definitely one of them. If you listen to the last episode, I talked about resources that I use, and one of the ones that came up a lot was next.io. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their summits because they are my favorites. They're a great example of a smaller, more focused summit that's designed around networking and conversation and education more than making deals and learning about products and specific companies. At these events, you see the same people multiple times across a couple of days, right? Maybe at breakfast, in sessions, at networking drinks. And that repetition, believe it or not, is everything, right? It goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about being seen, about being part of the scene. So get out there, especially if you know what region you're going to be working in or targeting, or where expertise would be most valuable for you. Hit up the regional events, right? You've got LATAM focused conferences in Sao Paulo and Bogota, Nordic ones in Stockholm, the Balkans, every now and then there's something in Belgrade or Sofia. There's payments focused meetups in Amsterdam. And then Malta, I think throughout the year there's constantly something happening, usually in the spring or autumn. But Malta is a hotbed for these types of things. And once you've been to a few, you start to recognize the rhythm of the year, right? The start of the year tends to be ICE in January, February. I think it used to be February, but now this year it's in January. Early autumn, it tends to be SBC. Their big one is in Lisbon now. And then the rest of the year sort of fills in with these smaller regional events or more thematic events, like around affiliates or around payments or around responsible gambling. And with that familiarity and getting to know that flow in the different conferences that are going on throughout the year, suddenly you're not an outsider anymore, and you're not going into these things guessing. If you really immerse yourself in this, you become part of the calendar, right? Part of other people's calendars where they expect to see you there. All right, now let me talk a little bit about how to interact with people, talking with people without an agenda. Because that's hard when you're working and you've traveled to this place and your company spent money or you've spent money to be there. So people tend to want a return on things when you've spent money and time and effort. But hold that thought. Don't get ahead of yourselves. One of the biggest things that holds not just newcomers, but anyone back is the idea that you need a reason to talk to someone. You don't. At these summits, if you walk up to a stand, even a big one, and you're not there to sell anything, that's fine. Most people working these stands are there because they enjoy talking about what they do as well. A simple, honest introduction is more than enough to go in cold. Saying you're new, saying you're learning, saying you've heard their name come up and wanted to say hello. That's not wasting anyone's time. That's how relationships start. And if the conversation is short, that's okay. You're not trying to get something. You're letting yourself be seen, and you are getting to know the people that stood out to you for whatever reason that was. But the important thing is that you're meeting these people in person, which, as I said before, makes everything easier later. So here's something people tend to only realize after several events and going through spinning their wheels for a long time. Once someone has met you in person, even briefly, every future interaction becomes easier. So just know that. You might think, oh, I'm not significant to them. I only met them for a minute. They're not going to remember me. They don't care. In most cases, people will at least pretend that they remember and appreciate that you're reaching out. And now when you're interacting with these people online, your LinkedIn messages feel less cold. Introductions carry more weight. Conversations, instead of starting from scratch, pick up where they left off. Feels natural. And you stop being a quote unquote profile to these people and you start being an actual person. For real. That shift is subtle, but it is huge. And it's one of the reasons conferences are still so important in iGaming, despite the whole industry basically being online. You would think if any industry would be fine without some face-to-face human interaction, it would be something like iGaming, where the whole separation between us and other industries is the fact that we're strictly online. So keep that in mind. All right. So let me just reinforce some of this stuff now. Let's talk about what a successful summit actually looks like. I gave you the basics of what you should be trying to do. Let me paint a realistic picture of a successful first summit. So let's say you go to an event like SBC Lisbon or a Next.io summit. You don't have a packed meeting schedule. Okay. You don't try to. You show up, you walk the floor, you attend a couple of talks, you strike up conversations when they feel natural, you introduce yourself without apologizing for being new. That's a big one. That's fine. Nobody cares. Cool that you're new. Glad that you're here. Welcome to the party. You exchange contact details with a handful of people and you follow up. At the end of this summit, you're going to leave tired. You'll be a bit overwhelmed, but you should be much clearer on everything. You understand the industry better than you did 3 days ago now. You're going to recognize some names. You've got a few people that you could message in the industry without it feeling weird. That's success. That builds over time. I know it sounds tiny. I know it sounds like I traveled all the way there. I should be getting more out of it. Patience. Just be patient. Plant the seeds. Now let's talk about the follow-up, the week after the conference, maybe the 2 weeks after the conference. This part really matters. In fact, this would be the breaking point, I would say, between a successful summit and not. Because this is where a lot of people drop the ball. So write this part down. So I think this is an important point. The conference doesn't end when the conference ends. Right? They can close the doors, they can turn the lights off, but for you, the conference doesn't end until minimum 1 week later, but more like 2 weeks later. So what do? Well, in the days after the event, take a bit of time to follow up. Not with a sales pitch, just with recognition. I'm serious. A simple message works. Something like, hey, great meeting you at ICE. I really enjoyed our chat about AI and iGaming. Looking forward to connecting in the future. And that's it. You're not asking for anything. You're just reinforcing the connection. Do that consistently, and you start building a network that actually remembers you. And this is the most important part, is happy to hear from you. There's no point in having great contacts if every time you ping them, they're like, oh, this guy again. He's trying to sell me on this, or I don't need him for that. Patience, as I said. All right, so you've got one summit under your belt. We know what success looks like. Next one is coming up. How to prepare for it. Well, you start by reflecting on the last one. What felt awkward? What went well? Who would you like to see again? What would you like to talk to them about? The next time you attend, you should walk in with a bit more confidence. You might recognize someone. You might be recognized. That part's fun. The first time that someone says, "Oh, hey, I remember you from the last summit." And that little comment, at least for me, I can remember the first time that happened. That changes everything. That really made me feel like I belong, like I was part of the scene. And that's how showing up compounds. And you see the results. So if you're new to iGaming and you're thinking about attending your first conference, here's what I want you to take away from this episode. 3 things. Number 1, you don't need to impress anyone. Number 2, you don't need a pitch. And number 3, you don't need to know everything. You just need to show up, and then show up again, and then show up again and again. You get me. The industry rewards familiarity. It rewards trust, and it rewards people who are genuinely interested in others. That's not just iGaming. That's business. And conferences are one of the best ways to build that. Slowly, naturally, and in a way that actually feels good. A win-win for both parties. You've heard me talk about that several times in other episodes. Should always be looking for the win-win. And there you have it. You've got it. You now understand. You just got to go to these events, and over time, what once felt intimidating starts to feel like community, and that really does feel nice. In fact, when I first got into iGaming, I didn't have the expectation that I was just going to go headfirst into this industry. But it is these summits and the people that I've met at these summits and the energy that I get from them and the brands and the businesses that have not only kept me in it, but kept me fired up, super excited about being in it, so much so that I've got a podcast trying to bring other new people into the industry because I think it's so great and so exciting. So I will leave you with that. Thank you for listening to the iGaming Experience. I'm your host, Sam Bhatti, here in the Zebra Studios. And of course, if you are interested in reaching out to me for any reason, questions, comments, episode suggestions, you can hit me up either on whatever platform you're on where you found this podcast or at my email, sam@zebrasolutions.me. Thanks, everyone. Catch you in the next one.